Real quick, in case you're wondering why this video isn't talking about Caught by a Wave like I said I would in my last video, it's because that movie isn't out yet. The list that I normally follow online listed it as being released on the end of February or something like that. But it turns out that the movie is actually being released at the end of March. So there was some sort of miscommunication that happened with the writer of that list that I was examining online. So you can rest assured that I will be reviewing Caught by a Wave in the future. It'll just take a little bit more time till that review comes out because I have to wait until the movie actually gets released. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's move on to today's review. Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to talk about Moxie. Moxie's story is essentially focused on a teenage girl named Vivian Carter who started a new year at her high school, but she ends up getting a lot more than she bargained for this particular year. And most of the important things and scenes that happen in this movie take place at this Rockport high school. It's just your average anytown high school that's set in a suburban environment. Vivian meets up with her friend Claudia before they go into school, and they're chit-chatting about random things, and before you know it, they're back into their regular routine going to class. Except it ends up not being their regular routine, as Vivian is introduced to two new characters that very quickly change the tone of the story. Up to that point in the movie, it's pretty light in tone. There's not really any scene that suggests that anything serious is going to happen until she enters that classroom. Once Vivian gets to class, she's introduced to this girl named Lucy, who's a new girl at her school, and she kind of keeps to herself because she doesn't really know anyone at the school, understandably so because it's her first day, and she ends up sitting in front of the football team captain, Mitchell Wilson. And I just have to say, Mitchell acts like a complete douchebag to Lucy in this scene. He's being sexist toward her, and I think he was even being racist toward her in that particular scene because she appears to be of Afro-Latino descent. So he just makes all sorts of weird remarks to her in that particular scene that made me go, ooh. Let's just say the movie makes it abundantly clear who the main antagonist is in this story. Over the next few scenes, Vivian sees a lot of harassment that's directed toward Lucy by Mitchell, and she ends up getting fed up with it and talking about it with her mother whenever she's home from school. And her mother, by the way, is played by Amy Poehler, who also happens to be the director of this movie. I think she made another movie on Netflix called Wine Country, I think it was. I haven't seen that yet, so I'll try to check it out as soon as I can. Vivian talks about these incidents to her mother, and her mother gives her advice about what she can do to deal with those particular situations, and during those conversations between the two of them, Vivian learns of her high school rebel days. Specifically the fact that she was into all of these pro-feminist movements back when she was in high school, and because Vivian is interested in learning more about these causes, she ends up sifting through a lot of her personal memorabilia that she saved and gathered from those days. She ends up being inspired from her mother's social activism back in her heyday, and she decides that she's going to follow in her mom's footsteps by starting a zine called Moxie, which is what the main concept of the movie centers around. Slowly but surely, this zine, Moxie, gathers a bunch of girls in the school together that have different backgrounds, but they all center around one goal, and that's the fact that they want to promote feminism at their school. And this is the part where I have to say, if you're against feminist movements in any way, shape, or form, if you're not for those kinds of things, you should probably stop watching this review because this movie will definitely not be right up your alley. Personally, I am not against feminism at all, but the way that it's portrayed in this movie just feels wrong and kind of weird to me. And in order for me to explain why it's weird, I think it's important to first go into the characters a little bit more. There's nothing really special about Vivian that stands out to me as a character. She just copies what her mother did, and she expects that everyone else will fall in line with her. But she's not really that confident about it at the beginning. In fact, she doesn't even reveal her identity whenever she's printing out these magazines. She doesn't author anything or anything like that. She just prints them and leaves them on top of some sort of device in a girl's bathroom or whatever, and she lets people discover it for themselves organically. While I like that idea of marketing concept, it didn't really make me believe in Vivian as a character. It just seemed like she didn't have any confidence in her ability to promote this movement. She mostly leaves the heavy stuff of the movement to Lucy, who's by far the loudest character of all the social causes that happen in the story. And it is thanks to Vivian that a lot of characters end up rallying together and coming together, and she is able to help build a community tangentially through her efforts, but I just feel like she didn't really do enough to stand out to me. And I know I talked about Mitchell already as a character and how he's extremely obnoxious, but those words alone do not do him justice. He was truly grating to see on camera. Just everything about his personality, from the way he talked, to the way he acted, to how he behaved to other characters. I hated him. And I'm still not sure in reviewing this movie if it's a good kind of hate or a bad kind of hate. On one hand, I genuinely believed he was a scumbag and I couldn't wait to see him get his just desserts. But on the other hand, I feel that there were aspects of him that just felt completely unrealistic just in terms of how he was portrayed. I highly doubt that Mitchell would be able to get away with some of the behavior that he did at this school. There's no way that no other teacher that's seen him out in the hallways would have noticed him, or any of the things that he did in class or by his locker, and he does get pointed out a couple times, but it's never really enough to be like, okay, what's going on in this school exactly? Why are you letting him get away with all these clearly awful things that in a real world everyone would be talking about? I know that the concept of the movie was centered around toxic masculinity pervaded through the school, and they had to use Mitchell in that respect, but I just felt that as a character, he was too silly for me to take that part seriously. There are other characters that help balance out the kind of blandness and silliness of the other characters. Claudia, as I mentioned before, is Vivian's best friend, and I thought out of all the characters, she was the best one, in my personal opinion. She hails from Asian heritage, as you can see in the movie, but they actually use that to a degree that I personally felt was very realistic in how it was portrayed. Unlike the other girls in the Moxie Club, like Vivian and Lucy and all those girls, they all organize all these events together and they try to do all these things together as a group, but Claudia doesn't feel 100% comfortable doing that, even though she does fully support the Moxie Club and the message behind it. And I like that they brought in that cultural aspect of the fact that she comes from an Asian background and comes from a strict family that enforces cultural standards that are very different from her own personal beliefs. And they show her on a few occasions trying to balance what her family wants and what she wants, while also trying to fit in with the Moxie Club at the same time. And there's this whole intersectionality vibe that's going on, and you really get a sense that Claudia is going through a lot of conflicts at the same time, on top of the pressures of being a girl in high school in general, and it was just great to see that all play out on camera. I also like Seth. Seth was the love interest for Vivian in the movie, and he was just a really laid back and chill guy. He acted in a more appropriate way compared to all the other female characters that did in Moxie. Unlike all those girls who were really loud and brash in how they presented themselves in their movement, Seth was just very chill, very easygoing, didn't really try to push his message upon other people, but he also let Vivian know that he fully supported her and would do anything that he can to support the movement. So as far as some of the characters were concerned, I do think that the movie had its heart in the right place as far as promoting feminism, or at least social activism in general, in a high school environment. I fully believe that activism should fully be supported and promoted in school environments. Speaking as an educator myself, I've seen a few cases over the years that made me wonder why those particular people didn't have some sort of representation that they could fall back on. I would see a pamphlet that pointed out a group here or there, but there was never really some sort of diversity or inclusion office that was dedicated to misrepresented people. At best, there might be a guidance counselor available to that particular student for whatever issues that they were being affected by, but other than that, that's it. And I think in the case of a massive environment like a high school, there should absolutely be some sort of representation for visible minorities or any person that feels misrepresented. There just absolutely should be that resource available. There's no reason not to. That being said, all the positive messages that come about with promoting diversity and inclusion and feminism and all that, it all ends up just getting bogged down by what I feel is a ton of man-hating. We get hints of what Vivian's mom is like right off the bat whenever she's in a grocery store and she's at the counter and this guy's helping her put groceries in, or at least trying to, and she's like, no, don't do that, I can put that in myself. And she's like starting a whole argument right there at the counter. It's like, lady, chill out, he's just doing his job. And there's another scene in the movie where Lucy, in this case, she's hosting some sort of concert for the Moxie girls, and she says something to the effect of, "End the white man's chokehold on us." I knew that she was referencing Mitchell in this case, but Mitchell had another associate in that movie whose name was Garza, and he was a black man, and he's fully in on everything that Mitchell's doing, and a lot of times he ends up cooperating with him on his bad behavior. It just made no sense to me. It's like, why do you say "end the white man's chokehold," but you see another character associating with that white man who happens to be a different color? And you could make the argument that it's his white masculinity that's helping promote this behavior, Mitchell's white masculinity that's helping Garza participate in all this stuff that's going on. But in order to do that, we would have to get into the whole white feminism thing, and that could just go on for hours. I could talk all day about that sort of thing. In fact, the movie itself actually brings up white feminism to a certain extent when Claudia argues with Vivian, in that Vivian doesn't really get what Claudia is going through as an Asian woman because Vivian is white. And race isn't even the only thing that this movie talks about, or feminism for that fact. It also talks about ableism, and it talks about trans rights, all kinds of things, but I felt that the movie didn't really cover them in enough detail as it should have. In fact, I didn't even realize that this movie had a trans character in it. I don't know, maybe I just wasn't paying attention for that particular scene, but apparently there was a trans character in that movie, and I was looking up reviews of this movie after I finished watching it. I was like, wait, what? There's a trans character and I didn't know about it? How did that happen? There's also one girl that was on a wheelchair in this movie, and she was a great character for what little we've seen of her. I was looking so forward to seeing more of her. She just had a ton of jokes, like when she was trying to wheel past people, she was like, get out of my way, this is handicap parking or something like that. And then she's like in the marching band and she's situated in the back because she sees herself as an eyesore, or that's how she interprets her situation anyway. She just knows that she's put there for that particular reason, and she just had a ton of humor about the whole thing, and I was looking forward to hearing her side of the story whenever she eventually sides with the Moxie Club. But they never do anything with her. All these things that are going on, like race, trans, sexism, ableism, all these things that are thrown in, it feels like the movie is just having them in for the sake of having them in, just to earn diversity points. And on top of all of this mishmash of random things that are thrown in the movie just wasn't really that funny. I don't know what it was, but there was a lot of cringeworthy scenes that just had really bad dialogue and just things that didn't come out right as far as the whole social activism thing was concerned. Maybe I missed something that happened in the beginning, but I didn't really understand what the whole stars and hearts thing was about. The girls that eventually get associated with the Moxie Club early on in the story, they start drawing all these hearts and stars on their hands and palms and on their wrists. I didn't really understand what the point of that was. Like, how is this supposed to help your movement? How is this supposed to promote feminism? And again, a lot of the dialogue in this movie is just centered around man-hating. There's a scene where Lucy is looking at playing cards and she notices the king and queen cards and she goes, you know, these cards have the same value. Why does king have to come first? Like, really? That's something important to you? The fact that king comes above queen? Something I noticed about this movie about halfway through it is that the movie didn't really have any sort of concrete goal other than to promote feminism at the school. And that's all well and good, but whenever you have a central antagonist involved, like Mitchell, especially someone who's super awful at everything that he does, you'd expect that he would get his just desserts and that justice would be served to him. There is something that does happen to him, and everyone gets their comeuppance in that regard, but it just felt so undercooked. And that was the feeling that I had about this movie. Everything just felt so underbaked and underdeveloped. The supporting cast had barely any details behind them other than the fact that they supported feminism, which, great, that's awesome. What else do you have for us? There's one girl in the Moxie Club who wants to wear whatever she wants. She basically is 100% against a dress code of any kind, and the principal takes issue with that despite the fact there's another girl sitting right beside her that has the same tank top in class, and rather than take her outside the class to talk to her about it in person and try to sort things out with her, she raises a big fuss about it in the middle of the classroom that she's in. It's like, lady, you are not behaving like a real-life principal would in that situation. What are you doing? Oh yeah, I just remembered at that Moxie concert that Lucy was hosting, she ends up kissing one of the Moxie girls for like 5 seconds when they're in the middle of the crowd. And there was no indication at any point in the story leading up to that part that Lucy was a lesbian. And it just feels, again, that the movie was throwing these things in just because it wanted to, without thinking about whether or not it added to the story or not. I know it feels like I'm complaining a lot about this movie, and I really don't want to. This movie's heart, again, is in the right place, but there's just so many problems with its presentation that I cannot ignore. There are a few funny scenes in this movie that do make things a little bit better for me. Like the copy guy at the shop where Vivian gets her zines printed from. He is hilarious. I loved every word that came out of that guy's mouth. When Vivian first enters the shop that guy is in and she presents the magazine that she wants printed, she enters the shop in a huff and she's like, I want a crap load of these printed. And the copy guy responds to her and he goes, How much is a crap load? I just loved how deadpan he was in his presentation. I love deadpan humor like that. There was also a little detail in Vivian's classroom where most of her classes take place that I thought was brilliant. It changes subtly over the course of the movie, and you don't really notice it at first, but whenever you first read it, and just the way that it's portrayed on the whiteboard was absolutely hilarious. And of course the way it changed after the fact was doubly hilarious. The fact that they went that much effort with that gag, but they don't make it a point to bring it out to the audience and they just leave it up to them to discover it themselves, I thought was awesome. Overall, Moxie was okay for me. Not really anything terrible, but nothing fantastic either. If it sounds like I hate it in this review, it's only because I'm passionate about the content that it's trying to promote, specifically with regards to promoting social activism in schools. I really do feel that there's a fundamental issue of underrepresentation that is happening in our modern school systems, and the fact that that's still happening today, in this day and age, is absolutely shameful. I like the fact that this movie exists and the message that it has in place. I love that they're having it out there, but I just felt that the way that it was presented was very subpar. It throws every kind of diversity under the sun that you can think of, and everything just gets glossed over. Anything like trans or ableism or anything like that, it only scrapes the surface. It just doesn't do enough to kind of really assist with the whole topic of exploring feminism and promoting social activism in schools. There's just not enough detail that this movie has going for it that warrants having a 2-hour runtime. If they had reduced this movie's runtime by about 15-20 minutes and dedicated more of a focus on one particular topic rather than spreading a bunch across all over the place, then I think this movie would have fared much better. That and the fact that there's just so many cringeworthy scenes and just so much awful dialogue and writing present in the story, it just really brought down my mood for this particular movie. I really wanted this to succeed, but ultimately I just couldn't get behind it. If you enjoy social activism and feminism, any of those sorts of things, and you don't mind putting up with underdeveloped characters and really bad dialogue, then I think you can find some enjoyment in this movie. For me, I didn't really mind this movie, but there just wasn't enough substance overall for me to get behind it. Anyways guys, that's going to be my review of Moxie. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the French action film Sentinelle. Bye bye!